Hey everyone, this is Bales. I'm at DraftKings and going to break down a few of my lineups from the Millionaire Maker in week 8. I played, I think, 99 or 100 lineups, and I said last week that I've been doing that more mass entering when I used to play around maybe 15 or 20 at the most and manage them by hand. But since we changed the player models tool and multi lineup at FantasyLabs, I've just found it a lot easier to create really good lineups that I would create by hand, and also it's just much easier to balance a portfolio of players, given that we have a player liking where you can just tell us the players who you want to use, and min and max exposure now, so you can say I want Derek Carr in between 30 and 40% of lineups, which I did not do, and I wish I did, but and then we will build around that. So it's become a lot better to automate lineups and upload them and very easily and edit them on DK especially. So my top lineup finished 314th, scored 200, just over 200 points. I think I cashed 44 lineups of the 99, so it was good considering I had a ton of Hilton, which I think was a mistake in hindsight. A lot of Spencer Ware, who got hurt, a ton of Ty Montgomery, who didn't hurt me here because I just swapped down to Devontae Adams, which I think a lot of people did. That was pretty easy. And I had Devontae in some lineups already that I had to do by hand, but for the most part, just swapped from my Montgomery down to Adams. But on FanDuel, I had a lot, and he was only, I think, 8.7% owned in the 300 on FanDuel, and I couldn't swap. I had a lot more than 8.7, so that killed me. Yeah, and a couple other plays. So given all that, I think that the results were fine for me, just because I had more than the field on all of those guys. This top lineup wasn't really representative of my exposures. I didn't have a lot of really any players here other than Devontae Adams, who I ended up having in more than 41% of lineups after the swap from Montgomery, and Jordan Matthews I had a lot, certainly a lot more than 2%. It was about even with David Johnson at 16. Didn't have a ton of Carr or Cooper, but it was probably about even with the field, maybe slightly more. Crowell really didn't have a lot of, wasn't even going to have him in my player pool, and then I just set his max exposure to 5%, so I had a couple lineups. This might have even been the only Crowell lineup. He was the same price as Devontae Booker, and I had a ton of that. I didn't think that was a good situation to get away from, so if you look through the rest of my lineups, and the one that came in second here that scored 195 was really a lot more representative of the players that I used. I had a ton of Jacquez, more than 20%, which was his ownership here, a ton of Mike Evans, who didn't do well, a lot of Gronk, who did, and then a lot of Devontae Booker, probably around the field, 65.5%, and a lot of Seahawks D as well. So this lineup is more in line with where my exposures were. The one that did well was Carr to Cooper stack, which you pretty much needed to win. I liked Matthews a lot in the flex, and knew he would be low owned there. Didn't really like the pace, but still thought it was a decent situation for a guy that they're going to have to throw to more, I think, which we saw with his 11 catches last night. And yeah, so those were top, I guess the top one was maybe top 0.1 or top 0.15% lineup. Had a few that scored pretty well, and overall it was a good result. Worst lineup finished 199,699th, 98.92 points. This one had a Wilson Jimmy Graham stack, which was obviously awful. Ingram, didn't have much of him. He was similar to Crowell, but he fumbled early, obviously, and then didn't touch the ball again. So negative points out of a running back, not good. Devontae Booker in this lineup, like I said, had him in a ton of lineups. And I did have a lot of Devontae Freeman as well. So I think that was He and I thought he was definitely underpriced. I thought he would be in way more than 16%, but there were so many obvious value running backs that I thought that he might be a little bit underowned, which I definitely think he was at 16%. And then I thought Zeke, who I think was in 21% maybe, I thought that Zeke would be in a lot fewer lineups. But I think now with Ezekiel, it's like a situation where you just can't really get away from. It's sort of turning into like David Johnson, where you can play those guys every week, or similar to the top receivers where like Julio, Mike Evans, AJ Green, where unless they're in just the absolute worst situation, you probably want to get exposure to those guys every week, because they can just make or break a lineup, and there's only so many guys that have a truly elite ceiling. But the way that they're using Zeke in Dallas is really good for fantasy owners, in terms of like it's just such a scarce workload where you can't really reproduce that. And obviously he's a very good running back in a very good offense, at least for running the ball. The winner was Jax 101, who's Eric Crane, and congratulations to him. He came in first, third, and fourth. He's a really great guy. I met him in San Diego, and former poker player and really good daily fantasy player, and definitely good to see him win. I like to see guys who I like have success, and I think he's just a really good guy, really good person for DFS. But he went with Karan Cooper, obviously. Theo Riddick, I thought, was a really interesting tournament play, and you can see, I mean, Lions scored only 13 points, but just because of how often they're going to throw him the ball, and I think going to continue to throw him the ball. He had 8 receptions, 77 yards, scored through the air. He has just a really high floor, I think, and really high ceiling too, with how they use him as basically a wide receiver, and with no real running back there, he's also getting carries. Mohamed Sanu, I had a lot of Sanu as well. I think he benefited at the end of the game from Julio maybe being a bit banged up, but scored that late touchdown, which was huge. Let me see okay, so Congo Song also had Sanu. He also went Kelsey at only 8.2%, and Kelsey was tight end was tough this week. He had a couple of the guys, Reed and Eifert, who's back, that did really well, were in the London game, so they weren't part of this slate. And then you could pay up, and there were two obvious ones I thought, in Graham, who didn't do well, and Gronk, who did, or you could go super cheap. For the most part, which is what people were doing with Barnage, who is very highly owned, and Doyle. But then in between there, and I think that's why Kelsey was maybe underowned, and this is like an example of how just the way that pricing looks can influence ownership, where people were saying, I'm either going to save here, and most people did, and then as you move up in salary, it's like, okay, well, if I'm paying for Kelsey, I'm just going to pay up for Graham or Olsen, or just pay up for Gronk. So I think Kelsey was underowned, perhaps for that reason. And you can see that Eric went with Booker and Broncos pairing here, made a lot of sense. And overall, this is a amazing lineup for him. He actually, he didn't have Zeke here, did he? No. Okay. Yeah, he still went with the Broncos and Booker. He was fading Zeke at the end of the game, and I thought he was going to lose it. The Cowboys had the first and goal at maybe like the 6, and you can see he won by 3.3 points. Zeke had 96 rushing yards, so 4 more rushing yards, and he would get 3 point. Congo Song would have scored 3.4 points, so he didn't actually need to score there. He just needed 4 more rushing yards to hit the 100-yard bonus. And Eric would have lost, and that would have been, I guess, an 850K swing, I think. So pretty sick. And I was watching him sweat it live, and that was really fun. But congratulations to him, and yeah, good luck in week 9.